the ferocity of Russian airstrikes that we saw in 2015, 2016, what we're seeing now doesn't come close to it. There's a sentiment that Russia's heart really isn't in defending the Assad regime as it was, a decade ago. I think we saw, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, was speaking in Doha just a few hours ago. And he, conceded that potentially there is a Syria without Assad. Now, that's a line which would have been unheard of from a Russian official 6 or 7 years ago.
Now, rebels in Syria have reached the outer suburbs of Damascus. Sky News is reporting they're about 10 kilometers away from the center. And also there are reports that they have toppled a statue of Bashar al-Assad's father. Well, joining us now is Gareth Browne, a journalist with The Economist in Beirut. Gareth, good afternoon.
Afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
The rebels are reportedly only 10 kilometres from Damascus. Tell us what is going on in the region.
Well, things are moving at real breakneck speed. And this morning we saw really significant gains by the Syrian opposition in southern Syria. So yesterday they took Deraa, which is the main city in the south, not far from the border with Jordan. And now we see them taking towns sort of on the southern fringes of Damascus. And this is significant because thus far, the advances have mainly been from the north. We saw Aleppo, Syria's second largest city, fall almost overnight. We've seen them advancing into Homs, another key city in the heart of the country. But what we're seeing today and yesterday is really this whole new front open up in the south. So this is no longer a single line of advance. We have Damascus being pressed from the north, from the south, and also by groups from the east. And frankly, I'm scared to give you any information because by the end of this call, it's almost out of date. But with every hour that ticks by, it seems harder and harder to see how Bashar al-Assad's regime can really survive this.
Looking at the wires and the news agencies, what we understand is that Syrian president denies fleeing Damascus, his office saying that he is still in the capital city. Is this a case of Bashar al-Assad having been abandoned by the allies of Syria? We had Russian aircraft bombing the rebels earlier on this week. Of course, Syrian president has always had the assistance of Iran. What's happened?
I think he has been abandoned. I think he has been abandoned by his kind of closest allies. We know he was in Abu Dhabi, just days ago, basically begging for help. That bore nothing. There's been phone calls to Russia, to Iran. And, as you mentioned there have been Russian aircraft striking rebel positions in Aleppo and in Hama. But it's been very lackluster, and you really get the feeling, speaking to officials working on Syria, but also people in Syria, that the ferocity of Russian airstrikes that we saw in 2015, 2016, what we're seeing now doesn't come close to it. There's a sentiment that Russia's heart really isn't in defending the Assad regime as it was, a decade ago. I think we saw, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, was speaking in Doha just a few hours ago. And he, conceded that potentially there is a Syria without Assad. Now, that's a line which would have been unheard of from a Russian official 6 or 7 years ago. So I think Assad is alone. He's isolated. I think he knows that. But I think the people on the ground who are supposed to be fighting for him, his generals, his soldiers, also know that. And that's why they're barely putting up a fight. They fled Aleppo, they fled Hama. We're hearing reports of the same thing in Homs.
Yeah, and I can tell you that we've got reports that the Russian embassy in Syria has launched an appeal for its citizens, urging them to leave the country. So I guess they're not going to be getting much assistance from Russia. Just a final question before we go. How likely is it that Bashar al-Assad is going to be president in the next 24 hours?
I think he's going to survive the next 24 hours. But if I was to put my neck on the line, I'd say we're in the final weeks of his presidency. And I think once the city of Homs falls, which I think will probably fall in the next week, maybe sooner, then it's inevitable. I think the question is, does he fight to the death in Damascus? Or does he cut a deal and flee to, Russia or Dubai, where he's got family? I think if Homs falls, it's inevitable. But I would say were in the final weeks of his regime.
Tell us a little bit about the latest in the movement of people. People are obviously trying to get away from conflict. What's the latest?
So people still afraid from anything happening in northwest of Syria. Specifically, we are talking about like 1 week before they've been living in horror. They are being afraid from airstrikes and shelling. We witnesses like around over like 60 or 70 people were dead and over 200 people were injured during the airstrikes. Our team there is trying their best to respond around 24 hours, 7 days a week. What we are witnessing is very bad in Northwest. We are talking about families. One of our members who lost 12 members of his family. Humanitarian workers still working with their pace to respond to this emergency or responding to the displaced that's been there. Already, we have 1.8 million people living in the camps in northwest Syria. People are still around, moving and hiding. What we are witnessing is very, very bad. Last week, 2 or 4 days ago, I witnessed like photos. People don't have a place to go with. They are staying at streets, and while the smoke of the airstrikes behind them, they took the trees as a shelter and the ground a place to sit on without anything at all. I'm talking about families left their homes and staying on the streets without any place to go on. This is including children, women, and everyone else.
Yeah, is the government doing anything to help these refugees, or is it mainly help from humanitarian organizations like yours?
To be honest, like it is very it is led by the organization, the local organizations there. We did not witness any international organizations are working right now. All the work and support and emergency response and planning is being done by the local NGOs there. I'm talking like Violet. We lost 2 cars and 1 ambulance center being damaged due to the airstrike. Our members lost their homes, lost their family members, and we are still facing one of the baddest moments during this displacement.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing us up to date with the situation around the refugees in Syria and northwest Syria. Yem Syed Issa, the communications director for Violet Action Aid's partner in northwest Syria.